The weight of judgment pressed against my skin like a physical force as I stepped through the massive oak doors of the Riverside Manor. My hand rested lightly on Ari Cohen's arm, my fingers barely touching the expensive fabric of his charcoal suit. I could feel the tremor running through his body, subtle but unmistakable. Fear. Not of violence or business rivals, but of his own son's reaction to my presence here. The October air carried the scent of white roses and disapproval in equal measure. Through the foyer, I could hear the string quartet playing something classical, something appropriate for a wedding that cost more than most people earned in a year. My heels clicked against Italian marble as we moved deeper into the venue, each step an announcement of our arrival. I shouldn't be here. The thought had circled my mind like a vulture for the past 3 days, ever since Ari had asked me to attend Eitan's wedding. Not as his nurse. Not as the woman who had cared for his dying wife, but as his companion. His date. The woman on his arm. "You don't have to do this," I had told him in his study, watching him stand by the window overlooking the gardens Rachel had once tended. "I can stay away. This is Eitan's day." He had turned to me then, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that still made my breath catch. At 59, Ari Cohen commanded attention without effort. Silver threaded through his dark hair, and lines marked his face, maps of a life lived hard and loved harder. Power radiated from him like heat. "I need you there, Shira," he had said simply. "I can't do this alone." Now, standing in the entrance to the main hall where 200 guests had turned to stare, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the quartet seemed to falter, though they recovered quickly, continuing their measured performance. I felt every eye on me. On us. On the space between us that should have been occupied by Rachel Cohen, beloved matriarch, devoted wife, cherished mother, the woman who had died 18 months ago after a brutal 2-year battle with cancer, the woman whose memory still haunted every corner of this family, the woman whose hand I had held when Ari couldn't bear to watch her suffer anymore. Eitan stood at the altar, his face draining of color. Beside him, his bride Leora looked between us with confusion that quickly hardened into something colder. I recognized the expression. I had seen it countless times in the past 3 months since Ari and I had begun, tentatively, carefully, to build something beyond the professional relationship that had sustained us through Rachel's illness. The look said, "Who does this woman think she is?" Ari's hand covered mine where it rested on his arm. A small gesture, but unmistakable in its meaning. He was claiming me. Publicly. In front of his family, his associates, everyone who mattered in his world. I wanted to run. Instead, I lifted my chin and met the stares with the same quiet composure that had gotten me through 2 years of watching a vibrant woman waste away. The same strength that had allowed me to witness Ari Cohen, feared by half the city, weep like a child as his wife took her last breath. We moved to our seats, 5 rows from the front. Not the first row where Rachel should have sat. Ari had drawn that line at least. But close enough that everyone could see us. Close enough that Eitan would be forced to look at me throughout the ceremony. The whispers started immediately. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. The math was simple and damning. I was 32, 27 years younger than Ari. Young enough to be his daughter. The age difference alone would have been scandalous. Add in the circumstances of how we met, the intimacy of caring for his dying wife, and I became something worse than a scandal. I became a threat to Rachel's memory. Ari, a woman's voice cut through the murmurs. I turned to see an elegant woman in her 60s, her silver hair swept up in a classic style, her expression radiating disapproval. "I didn't expect to see you here with company. Elena." Ari's voice was perfectly controlled, but I felt his arm tense beneath my hand. "This is Shira. Shira, this is Elena Rossi, an old family friend. The emphasis on old wasn't accidental. Elena's eyes narrowed as she studied me with the precision of a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. How lovely, she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. I wasn't aware you were seeing anyone. So, soon after Rachel. The barb landed exactly as intended. I watched Aries' jaw tighten, watched him struggle between the man he was in his business, who tolerated no disrespect, and the man he was trying to be now, navigating grief and new beginnings. Rachel has been gone for 18 months, I said quietly, surprising myself. And she wouldn't have wanted Ari to spend Eitan's wedding alone. Elena's expression flickered with something, shock perhaps, that I had dared to speak, that I had invoked Rachel's name. You presume to know what Rachel would have wanted? Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You, who barely knew her? The irony of the statement almost made me laugh. Barely knew her. I had known Rachel Cohen in ways her oldest friends never had. I had seen her at her most vulnerable, her most afraid. I had been the one she confided in during the long nights when pain made sleep impossible. I had been the one she trusted with her deepest fears and her final wishes. But I couldn't say any of that. Not here. Not now. Excuse us, Elena, Ari said, his voice holding a note of finality that even she couldn't ignore. The ceremony is about to begin. We settled into our seats as the processional music started. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my gaze fixed forward, acutely aware of the stares burning into my back. Ari sat rigid beside me, his body language screaming discomfort despite his controlled expression. The ceremony was beautiful, traditional, exactly what Rachel had always wanted for her only son. I watched Eitan and Leora exchange vows, watched the love and commitment in their eyes, and felt the weight of my presence here like a stone on my chest. I shouldn't be here. The thought returned, insistent now. When the officiant asked if anyone had objections, the silence stretched unnaturally long. My heart pounded against my ribs. Would someone speak? Would Eitan himself stop his own wedding to demand I leave? But the moment passed. The ceremony continued, and when the couple was pronounced husband and wife, the applause was genuine if slightly subdued. We filed out with the other guests toward the reception hall. The corridor was packed with people offering congratulations, making small talk, pretending they hadn't just witnessed the most awkward wedding attendance in recent memory. Dad. Eitan's voice cut through the crowd. I turned to see him approaching, Leora at his side. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes, when they met mine, held nothing but cold fury. Eitan, congratulations. Ari extended his hand. The ceremony was beautiful. Eitan took his father's hand, but his gaze never left my face. Can we talk? Privately? After the reception, Ari said. This is your day. Enjoy it. Now. The single word carried all the authority of a man who had inherited more than just his father's business acumen. Eitan Cohen had his father's steel, his mother's grace, and right now, both were aimed directly at me. Ari looked at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded slightly. This confrontation was inevitable. Better to face it now than let it poison the entire evening. The garden, Eitan said, already turning. 5 minutes. As he walked away, Leora remained, her eyes assessing me with the calculation of someone used to evaluating threats. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said softly, her voice pitched so only Ari and I could hear. But Eitan loved his mother more than anything in this world. And seeing you here, on today of all days. She shook her head. You should be ashamed. She followed her new husband without waiting for a response, leaving us standing in the corridor surrounded by curious onlookers pretending not to watch our every move. I should go, I said quietly. Call a car. This was a mistake, Ari. No. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. We face this together. That's what we agreed. What we had agreed was that we would be honest, that we would honor Rachel's memory while allowing ourselves to move forward, that we would give whatever was growing between us a chance, despite the impossible circumstances. But standing here, feeling the weight of every judgmental stare, remembering the pain in Eitan's eyes, I wondered if some chances weren't worth taking, if some relationships weren't meant to survive the harsh light of public scrutiny. 5 minutes later, we stood in the garden where Rachel had once planned her own anniversary parties, where she had taught Eitan to garden as a child, where her ghost felt more present than anywhere else in this venue. Eitan faced us, his wedding suit already slightly rumpled, his jaw set in a line I recognized from his father. I want to know, he said, his voice deadly calm, who you think you are. The garden lights cast long shadows across Eitan's face, making him look older than his 30 years. Behind him, through the windows of the reception hall, I could see guests beginning to gather, champagne flowing, laughter rising. A celebration continuing without the groom. Eitan, Ari began, but his son raised a hand. I'm not talking to you right now, Dad. I'm talking to her. His eyes fixed on me with laser focus. You, the woman who thinks she can replace my mother. The accusation hung in the cool October air. I had prepared myself for this moment, rehearsed responses, imagined scenarios. None of it helped. Standing before this grieving son, wearing a dress that cost more than I used to make in a month, I felt like the interloper everyone believed me to be. I'm not trying to replace anyone, I said quietly. My voice didn't shake, a small victory. Your mother was irreplaceable. Don't. Eitan's voice cracked. Don't you dare speak about her like you knew her. But I did know her. The words came before I could stop them. I knew her for 2 years. Every day. Every night when the pain was worst. Every moment when... You were paid to know her, he interrupted. You were her nurse. That's not the same as family. That's not the same as loving her. Harry stepped forward, his hand moving to my lower back in a gesture of support that probably looked possessive to his son. That's enough. No, it's not enough. Eitan's composure was cracking now, revealing the raw grief beneath. It's been 18 months, Dad. 18 months since we buried her. And you bring this... He gestured at me, unable even to say my name. You bring her to my wedding? To the place where Mom should be standing? Your mother is gone, Eitan. Ari's voice was gentle but firm. She's been gone. And she wouldn't want... How do you know what she would want? The words exploded from Eitan. Were you there at the end? Were you holding her hand when she died? No. You couldn't even stay in the room. You left her. You left her with... His eyes cut to me. With a stranger. The truth of it silenced us all. I had been there at the end. I had held Rachel's hand when her breathing changed, when her eyes grew distant, when the morphine finally pulled her under for the last time. Ari had fled the room hours before, unable to watch, broken by watching the love of his life slip away piece by piece. It had been just Rachel and me in those final moments, her hand in mine. Her last words whispered so quietly I had to lean close to hear them. Words I had carried like a sacred trust for 18 months. Words that burned on my tongue now, begging to be spoken. I'm sorry. My voice cut through the tension. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for the pain my presence here causes you. But I'm not sorry for knowing your mother. And I'm not sorry for being here with your father. Eitan's laugh was harsh. Of course you're not sorry. You got exactly what you wanted, didn't you? Played the devoted nurse, comforted the grieving widower, And now you're on his arm at family events. Very efficient. The implication stung more than it should have. I had heard similar accusations whispered behind hands, seen the knowing looks. The gold digger narrative was easy, convenient. It absolved everyone else of having to see the complexity of what Ari and I had built through shared grief and unexpected understanding. You don't know anything about what happened between your father and me, I said, my composure finally fraying. You don't know what your mother... Ari's hand tightened on my back, a warning. Not yet. Not like this. What? Eitan stepped closer, his expression hardening. What about my mother? What could she possibly have to do with this betrayal? It's not betrayal to move forward, Ari said. It's survival. And your mother, more than anyone, would understand that. Don't hide behind her memory to justify this. Eitan's voice dropped to something dangerous. You dishonor her every time you touch this woman. Every time you look at her. Every time you bring her into spaces where mom should be. I had endured a lot in my life. A childhood marked by instability. Nursing school while working 3 jobs. Years of caring for dying patients, absorbing their family's grief and anger. But standing in this garden, being reduced to this woman by someone whose mother had meant so much to me, something inside me cracked. Your mother asked me to do this, I said. The words fell like stones into still water. Eitan froze. Ari's hand dropped from my back. Even the garden seemed to hold its breath. What did you just say? Eitan's voice was barely above a whisper. I shouldn't continue. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to retreat, to let Ari handle this. But I had carried Rachel's truth for too long, had watched this man she loved suffer under the weight of misunderstanding. Your mother, I said carefully, knew she was dying months before the end. She knew your father would be lost without her. And she asked me. Shira, Ari's voice held a warning. Not like this. But I couldn't stop now. She asked me to make sure he didn't spend the rest of his life alone. The silence that followed was absolute. Eitan stared at me as if I had grown a second head. Behind him, I saw Leora appear in the garden doorway, drawn by some sixth sense that something was happening. You're lying. Eitan's words were steady, but his face had gone pale. My mother would never... She wrote you a letter, Ari said quietly. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a cream-colored envelope, slightly worn at the edges. She gave it to me 3 days before she died, made me promise to give it to you on your wedding day. Eitan stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. What? She wanted you to have it today. Wanted you to read it after the ceremony, after the joy of your wedding, before you saw Shira and me together. Ari held out the envelope. She knew how you would react, knew you would be angry, and she wanted to explain. Explain what? Eitan's hands remained at his sides, refusing to take the letter. Explain how she orchestrated you replacing her? Explain how she signed off on this betrayal? It's not betrayal, I said softly. It's love, the kind that extends beyond death. Leora moved to her husband's side, her hand finding his. Her expression had shifted from judgment to something more complex. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of grief she couldn't fully comprehend. Take the letter, son, Ari said. Read what your mother wanted you to know. Then decide if what you see between Shira and me is betrayal or blessing. Eitan's hand shook as he finally reached for the envelope. He stared at his name written in his mother's distinctive handwriting, and I watched his composure shatter. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he clutched the letter to his chest. I can't, he whispered. Not today. Not at my wedding. I can't fall apart right now. Then read it later, Ari said gently. But read it, Eitan. Know the truth. What truth? Eitan looked between his father and me, confusion and grief warring in his expression. What could she possibly have written that would make this okay? I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Up close, I could see Rachel in his features. Her eyes, her stubborn chin, her capacity for fierce love. Your mother loved you more than anything in this world, I said. Everything she did, every choice she made in those final months was about protecting the people she would leave behind. Including your father. Including you. How does this... He gestured between Ari and me. Protect me? Because I'm not the enemy, Eitan. I'm not trying to erase your mother or take her place. I'm trying to honor her final wish that the man she loved wouldn't spend the rest of his life drowning in grief and guilt. Leora spoke for the first time. What guilt? Ari's voice was rough when he answered. I left her at the end. I couldn't watch her die. I was a coward. Dad, Eitan began, but Ari shook his head. It's true. I ran. And Rachel knew I would. She knew I wouldn't be strong enough to hold her hand through the final moments. So she made sure Shira was there, made sure she wasn't alone. You weren't a coward, I said to Ari. You were human, and Rachel never blamed you for it. She understood. How do you know? Eitan's question was genuine now, the anger draining into exhaustion. How do you know what she understood? Because she told me. In the last weeks, when she could still talk clearly, she told me everything. About your childhood, Eitan. About the business, Ari. About her fears for both of you. And about her one wish that you wouldn't let grief destroy what she had built. Which was what? Eitan asked. A family, I said simply. A family that could survive loss and still choose love. The garden fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the reception. Somewhere inside, guests were probably wondering where the groom had disappeared to, where his father and the mysterious woman had gone. Eitan looked down at the letter in his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was small, young. I miss her so much. I know, Ari said. I do too. Then how can you... Eitan gestured helplessly. How can you be with someone else? This was the question I had asked Ari myself 3 months ago, when he had first suggested we move beyond the professional distance that had sustained us through Rachel's illness and the months after. I remembered his answer now, remembered the raw honesty in his eyes. Ari stepped closer to his son, his hand still holding the letter that carried his late wife's words across the boundary between life and death. The garden lights caught the silver in his hair, making him look both distinguished and vulnerable. Because loving Shira doesn't mean I stopped loving your mother, Ari said quietly. It means I'm choosing not to die with her. The words hung in the cool October air. I watched Eitan process them, saw the war playing out across his features. Grief, anger, confusion, and something else. Something that might have been understanding. Read the letter, Leora said softly, her hand tightening on her husband's arm. Whatever your mother wrote, she wrote it for you. For this moment. Eitan looked at his bride, this woman he had just committed his life to, and something in his expression shifted. He carefully opened the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the pages within. I knew what the letter said. Rachel had shared its contents with me as she wrote it, her hand growing weaker with each passing day, her determination to finish it, never wavering. But I had never told Ari exactly what his wife had written. Some things were meant to pass directly from mother to son. Eitan's eyes moved across the first page, and I watched his composure begin to crumble. Tears spilled freely now, tracking down his face as he read his mother's final words to him. The silence stretched. Minutes passed. Finally, Eitan looked up, his eyes red, his expression transformed. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew I would be angry. She knew I would judge you." He looked at me with something approaching wonder. "She told me not to. She told me that you were the kindness she needed when I couldn't be there. When Dad couldn't be there." Ari's eyes glistened. "What else did she say?" Eitan's voice cracked as he read aloud, his mother's words carrying across the garden. "My darling son, if you're reading this, it means you've seen your father with Shira. And if I know you, my fierce, loyal boy, you're furious. You think he's betrayed me. You think she's an interloper. You're wrong on both counts." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Shira gave me something precious in my final months. She gave me friendship when I was too sick to maintain old friendships. She gave me honesty when everyone else treated me like I was already glass. And most importantly, she gave me hope that the man I love wouldn't spend the rest of his life broken by my death." I felt Ari's eyes on me, but I kept my gaze fixed on Eitan, watching him absorb his mother's truth. "I asked her to look after your father," Eitan read, his voice steadying slightly. "Not as a nurse, not as an employee, but as a friend. Someone who would understand the weight of grief he carried because she had witnessed it alongside him. I asked her to make sure he didn't disappear into the darkness the way I knew he would try to." Eitan looked up at his father. "Mom knew you would blame yourself. She knew you would try to punish yourself by staying alone." Ari's voice was rough. "She knew me too well." "She loved you too much," Leora corrected softly. "Loved you enough to plan for a future she wouldn't be part of." Eitan returned to the letter, his voice breaking as he read. "I'm not asking you to be happy about this, Eitan. I'm not asking you to immediately accept whatever relationship might develop between your father and Shira. I'm only asking you to understand that love doesn't diminish because it's shared. Your father loving again doesn't mean he loved me less. It means he loved me enough to honor the life I wanted for him after I was gone." The words settled over us like a blessing. I had heard them before, had carried them in my heart for 18 months. But hearing them read aloud in this setting, at this moment, gave them new weight. "There's more," Eitan said, his eyes scanning the remaining pages. "She wrote about you, Shira, about conversations you had in the middle of the night when the pain was worst." My chest tightened. I knew what was coming. "She says you never pitied her, never treated her like she was dying, even when you both knew she was. She says you talked to her about everything, books, politics, your own dreams, your fears. She says you made her feel human when everyone else made her feel like a patient." I blinked back tears, remembering those long nights. Rachel propped up on pillows, her body failing but her mind still sharp. The way she would grab my hand when a wave of pain passed, grateful for the company, for the distraction, for someone who would treat her as Rachel, the person, rather than Rachel, the cancer patient. "She was easy to talk to," I said quietly, "even at the end, especially at the end." Eitan looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since we had arrived. "She told you about me, about the time I broke my arm falling out of the tree in the backyard, about how Dad carried me to the car and broke every traffic law getting me to the hospital." I smiled despite the tears on my cheeks. "She said you didn't cry until you saw how scared your father was. Then you sobbed for an hour." "I was 7, Eitan said, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "And Dad looked like he was going to have a heart attack." "Because you are my world," Ari said simply. "You always have been." "Mom knew that," Eitan said, looking back at the letter. "She wrote that her biggest fear wasn't dying. It was leaving you alone to carry all that love and fear by yourself. She was afraid you would bury yourself in grief and work and never let anyone in again. I tried, Ari admitted. For the first year after she died, I tried to do exactly that. I remembered that year. The calls at 2 a.m. when Ari couldn't sleep, couldn't stop the memories, couldn't face another empty house. The way he would show up at the hospital where I had taken a position after Rachel's death, just to sit in the cafeteria and talk about nothing and everything. The slow, careful way we had rebuilt our relationship from nurse and widower to friends to something neither of us had expected. What changed? Eitan asked. Ari looked at me. She did. She kept showing up, kept calling, kept refusing to let me disappear. And one day I realized that choosing to live wasn't betraying Rachel. It was honoring her. The letter says the same thing. Eitan said, his voice wondering. She says that if you love me, if you love her memory, the best way to show it is to live fully, to find joy again, to let someone in. He folded the letter carefully, reverently, and looked at me with new eyes. She chose you. My mother chose you specifically. She asked me, I corrected. I could have said no. But you didn't. No, I admitted. I didn't. Because I cared about her. And I care about your father. And the idea of him spending the rest of his life alone, punishing himself for being human, for having limits. I shook my head. Rachel wouldn't have wanted that. She wanted him to be happy, Leora said softly. That's what the letter says, isn't it? She wanted him to find happiness again. Eitan nodded, his eyes still on me. She says that happiness won't look the same as what he had with her, that it can't. But that different doesn't mean less. Different just means different. The wisdom in those words, the grace, nearly undid me. Rachel had been facing her own death, and still had the generosity of spirit to plan for those she would leave behind, to give her blessing to something she would never see. I owe you an apology, Eitan said to me, for what I said earlier, for how I treated you, for assuming the worst. You were protecting your mother's memory, I said. There's no apology needed for that. Yes, there is. He stepped closer, the letter still clutched in his hand. You were there for her when I couldn't be, when I was too scared to sit with her through the worst nights, when I used work as an excuse to avoid watching her suffer. You didn't have to do that. You were paid to provide medical care, not emotional support. But you did it anyway. She was worth it, I said simply. Your mother was an extraordinary woman. She was. Eitan looked at his father. And she loved you so much that she planned for your happiness after she was gone. That's... His voice broke. That's almost more than I can comprehend. Ari pulled his son into an embrace, both of them holding each other as they wept. I stepped back, giving them space, feeling Leora move to stand beside me. Thank you, she said quietly, for caring for his mother, for caring for him now, even when he didn't deserve it. Everyone deserves compassion when they're grieving, I replied. Not everyone gets it from the person they're grieving at. Leora's smile was sad, but genuine. You could have walked away tonight. Could have refused to come. Could have let Ari handle this alone. I made a promise to Rachel, I said. I don't break my promises. When Ari and Eitan finally separated, both their eyes were red, but something had shifted in Eitan's expression. The anger was gone, replaced by tentative acceptance. Will you tell me about her? He asked me. About those conversations you had? About who she was in those final months? I'd be honored, I said. He nodded, then looked at Leora. We should get back to the reception. People will be wondering where we disappeared to. Let them wonder, Leora said, linking her arm through his. This was more important. As we walked back toward the reception hall, Aitan fell into step beside me, his father and Leora walking ahead. "There's one more thing in the letter," he said quietly. "She wrote that if I could accept you, if I could see past my grief to the gift she was trying to give us all, I should tell you something." I looked at him questioningly. "She said to tell you thank you, for keeping your promise, for not giving up on Dad when it would have been easier to walk away." His eyes met mine. "She said you were the daughter she never had, and that she hoped one day I would be able to see you as the mother she could never be again." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stopped walking, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. Aitan took my hand, squeezing gently. "I'm not there yet. I won't lie and say I am. But maybe someday, if you're patient with me." "I can be patient," I managed to say. "Your mother taught me that." The reception hall buzzed with barely contained curiosity as we re-entered. Conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes tracking our movement across the room. Aitan's absence during the cocktail hour hadn't gone unnoticed, and our collective disappearance had fed the gossip mill that was already working overtime. But something had shifted. Aitan walked with his arm around Leora, but he paused to place his hand on his father's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by the watching crowd. And when we reached our table, he pulled out my chair himself. The small act of courtesy sent ripples through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "please welcome for the first time as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Aitan Cohen." The room erupted in applause as Aitan and Leora made their entrance. I watched Ari's face as he clapped for his son, saw the pride and love and relief written in every line. This was what Rachel had wanted. Her son celebrated, surrounded by family, moving into his future with joy, rather than drowning in the past. The evening unfolded with the choreographed precision of an expensive wedding. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and through it all, I remained acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed me like shadows. But the quality of the attention had changed. Where before there had been pure judgment, now there was curiosity. Questions. The sight of Aitan treating me with respect had created cognitive dissonance in guests who had been ready to write me off as an opportunistic homewrecker. Elena Rossi approached our table during dessert, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile. "Ari," she said, "may I speak with you privately?" Ari glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded slightly, and he rose to follow Elena to a quiet corner near the windows. I watched them talk, saw the way Elena's severe expression gradually softened, saw Ari's careful explanation, his hands gesturing as he spoke. Whatever he was telling her seemed to land differently than it would have before Aitan's public acceptance. When he returned, there was relief in his eyes. "She apologized," he said, settling back into his chair. "Said she spoke out of turn earlier, that if Aitan can accept our relationship, she has no right to question it." "She was protecting Rachel's memory," I said, "like everyone else here. Rachel doesn't need protecting." Ari's hand found mine under the table, his fingers warm and solid. She would have hated all this drama, would have wanted everyone to drink champagne and dance and celebrate Aitan's happiness. As if on cue, the band struck up the first dance. Aitan and Leora took to the floor, moving together with the easy grace of two people deeply in love. The sight made my chest ache with bittersweet joy. This was what Rachel had fought to stay alive long enough to see. Her son finding his partner, his future. She had made it to the engagement party before the cancer took its final, brutal turn. Had held Leora's hands and welcomed her to the family with genuine warmth. Had died 3 months before this day, but not before extracting promises from everyone she loved. When the song ended, the MC invited parents to join the couple on the floor. Ari tensed beside me. "I should go," I said, squeezing his hand. "Dance with your son and his bride. That's your place. He looked at me with such gratitude that it nearly undid me. Then he crossed to the dance floor, embracing Eitan and Leora both before the band began the traditional family dance. I watched from my seat, aware of eyes still tracking me, still assessing. But I kept my composure, my head high, my expression serene. That must be difficult, a voice said beside me. I turned to find an older gentleman settling into Ari's vacated seat. He had kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, his tuxedo well-tailored but not ostentatious. "I'm sorry," I said politely. "Watching him dance without you, knowing that some spaces aren't yours to occupy yet." He extended his hand. "David Friedman. I was Rachel's oncologist during her final year." Recognition flooded through me. Dr. Friedman. Rachel had spoken of him often, with respect and affection. "Shira," I said, shaking his hand. "I was her—" "I know who you are," he interrupted gently. "Rachel spoke of you constantly during our appointments. Said you were the only one who didn't treat her like she was already dead." The compliment, from this source, meant more than he could know. She was easy to care for. That's not what made the difference. Dr. Friedman's gaze was steady. What made the difference was that you saw her as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms to manage, or a tragedy to mourn. You gave her the gift of normalcy in the midst of terminal illness. "I just talked to her," I said. "Listened. Treated her the way I would want to be treated in her situation." "Exactly." He smiled. "Which is why she trusted you with the care of the person she loved most in the world." I looked at him sharply. "She told you?" "About asking me to. She told me she had found someone who could understand Ari's grief, because you had witnessed it firsthand. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by his reputation or his power. Someone who would call him on his tendency to wallow in guilt and self-punishment." Despite myself, I laughed softly. "She did know him well. She knew you both well." Dr. Friedman's expression grew serious. "I want you to know that what you're doing, honoring her wishes, caring for her husband, accepting the judgment and whispers, it takes real courage, the kind Rachel had in abundance." "I'm nothing like Rachel," I said automatically. "You're right," he agreed. "You're your own person with your own strengths, but you share her capacity for fierce loyalty and practical compassion. That's not nothing." On the dance floor, Ari was laughing at something Eitan had said, his face transformed by genuine joy. It was a sight I had worked for months to see, carefully drawing him out of the darkness that had consumed him after Rachel's death. "She would have liked seeing this," I said quietly. "Seeing them happy together." "She did see it," Dr. Friedman said. "In her mind, in her hopes. She saw this day countless times, planned for it, prepared for it, made sure that when it came, the people she loved would be free to celebrate, rather than drowning in grief. She was remarkable. She was." He stood, preparing to rejoin his wife across the room. "And she chose you to carry forward her legacy of caring for this family. Don't forget that, when the whispers get too loud." After he left, I sat alone with my thoughts, watching the celebration unfold around me. Guests danced and laughed, the champagne flowed, and slowly, tentatively, people began to approach our table. Not everyone. Some still gave me wide berth, their judgment clear in their expressions. But others, emboldened by Eitan's acceptance and Dr. Friedman's public conversation with me, ventured to introduce themselves. Rachel's book club friends, curious about the woman who had spent so much time with their friend in her final days. Business associates of Ari's who wanted to show support for their colleague's attempt at moving forward. Even a few family members, distant cousins and in-laws, who offered tentative welcomes. Each conversation was a small test, a negotiation of how to speak about Rachel without making me feel like an interloper. I navigated them as carefully as I had navigated Rachel's most difficult moments, with honesty, compassion, and respect for the complexity of grief. When Ari finally returned to the table, his cheeks flushed from dancing, his eyes bright with something that looked almost like happiness, he found me surrounded by a small group of women, all talking animatedly about Rachel's legendary garden parties. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder. "Not at all," one of the women said. "We were just telling Shira about the time Rachel convinced the entire neighborhood to participate in her elaborate scavenger hunt for charity. She raised $20,000 that day," another woman added, "and drove us all crazy with her competitive spirit." Ari's laugh was genuine. She hated losing at anything, even games she invented herself. The conversation continued, and I watched something beautiful happen. The women began to see me not as Rachel's replacement, but as someone who could contribute to keeping her memory alive. Someone who had different stories to share, different perspectives on a woman they had all loved. When the group finally dispersed, Ari pulled me to my feet. "Dance with me," he said. I hesitated. "Are you sure? People are already talking." "Let them talk." His hand found the small of my back, guiding me toward the dance floor. I'm tired of hiding what we are to each other. We moved onto the floor as the band began a slow jazz standard. Ari pulled me close, one hand in mine, the other resting at my waist. Around us, other couples danced, but I was acutely aware that we were being watched. "I'm proud of you," Ari murmured against my ear, "for how you handled tonight, for how you handled Eton. I didn't do anything except tell the truth. You did everything." His arms tightened slightly. "You gave me the courage to come here, to face my son, to claim my right to move forward. Without you, I would have made excuses, stayed away, let the distance between Aitan and me grow until it was unbridgeable." "Rachel wouldn't have let that happen," I said. "Rachel isn't here." His voice was gentle but firm. "You are, and you chose to honor her wishes even when it put you in an impossible position." We danced in silence for a moment, the music washing over us, the weight of the evening slowly lifting. "What happens now?" I asked. Ari pulled back slightly to look at me, his eyes serious. "Now we live. We honor Rachel's memory by choosing joy when we can find it. We support Eitan and Leora as they build their life together, and we figure out what our future looks like, one day at a time." It wasn't a grand declaration, wasn't a promise of forever, or a guarantee of easy days ahead. But it was honest. And after everything we had been through, honesty felt like the greatest gift we could give each other. 3 months after the wedding, I stood in the kitchen of what I was slowly beginning to think of as home rather than Ari's house. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the space Rachel had designed with such care. Her touches were everywhere. The herb garden by the window, the vintage dishes displayed on open shelving, the photograph of her and Ari on their 20th anniversary. I had been terrified of this space initially, terrified of occupying the kitchen where Rachel had cooked family dinners, where she had taught Aitan to bake his grandmother's recipes, where she had lived so fully before cancer stole her strength. But Ari had been patient, had never pressured me to change anything or erase her presence, had instead encouraged me to add my own touches alongside Rachel's, creating a space that honored the past while making room for the future. So now, Rachel's cookbook collection shared shelf space with my nursing textbooks. Her Dutch oven sat beside my espresso machine. Her handwritten recipe cards were filed next to the meal planning system I had implemented to manage Ari's strict cardiac diet, a necessity after his heart scare 2 months ago. That scare had been a turning point. Ari, who had always seemed invincible, had collapsed in his office from stress-induced arrhythmia. The doctors had been blunt. reduce stress, improve diet, slow down, or face serious consequences. For a man who had built an empire on being in control, the loss of control over his own body had been devastating, but it had also created an opening for me to care for him in a way that went beyond emotional support. I had redesigned his meals, researched heart-healthy recipes, coordinated with his cardiologist, and most importantly, refused to let him retreat into the self-destructive patterns that had nearly killed him in the year after Rachel's death. "You're not allowed to die on me," I had told him in the hospital, my voice shaking with equal parts fear and fury. "Rachel trusted me to keep you alive, and I don't break promises to the dead." He had looked at me from the hospital bed, pale and vulnerable, and something in his eyes had shifted. "I'm sorry," he had whispered. "I didn't think—" "That's right. You didn't think. About how Ethan would feel losing another parent. About how I would feel losing you." I had gripped his hand, fingers tight enough to hurt. "You don't get to give up, Ari Cohen. Not when we've come this far." Now, 3 months later, he was healthier than he had been in years. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes since Rachel's death had finally begun to fade, and his relationship with Eitan had strengthened in ways that brought tears to my eyes. The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my thoughts. Moments later, Eitan appeared in the kitchen doorway, Leora behind him, both bundled against the January cold. "Something smells amazing," Eitan said, unwrapping his scarf. "Please tell me you made your lemon chicken." I did. I smiled at the easy way he had begun to show up at the house, the casual comfort he had developed in my presence. "And roasted vegetables, because your father's cardiologist will kill me if I serve him anything fried." Leora laughed, moving to help me set the table. "How is he doing, with the new medication?" "Better. Complaining less about the dietary restrictions, which is a good sign." I pulled the chicken from the oven. He should be home any minute. He had a meeting with his lawyer about some business thing. Actually, about that. Eitan settled into one of the kitchen chairs, his expression growing serious. "I wanted to talk to you both, about the business." Ari arrived home as if on cue, his coat dusted with snow, his face lighting up when he saw our small gathering. "Is this an ambush?" he asked, but he was smiling as he hung up his coat. "More like an intervention," Eitan said. "Dad, we need to talk about succession planning." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Ari's expression closed off, the warmth draining from his face. "I'm not dead yet, Eitan." "No, but you nearly were 3 months ago." Eitan's voice was gentle but firm. "And we all know Mom would kill you herself if you worked yourself into an early grave after surviving cancer's attempt to steal you from us." The invocation of Rachel was deliberate, strategic. I saw Ari's defenses waver. "Your mother had opinions about a lot of things," Ari said carefully, "including this." Eitan pulled a folder from his bag. "I found this in her study last week, when Leora and I were sorting through some boxes. It's dated 2 months before she died." He handed the folder to Ari, who opened it with visible reluctance. I watched his face as he read, saw recognition dawn, followed by a complex mixture of emotions. "She made a succession plan," Ari said quietly, "without telling me. Because she knew you would never do it yourself." Eitan's voice was steady. "She knew you would cling to the business as a distraction from grief, that you would work yourself to death, rather than admit you needed to slow down." Ari looked at me. "Did you know about this?" I shook my head. "Rachel and I talked about many things. Business succession wasn't one of them." "She wanted you to retire," Eitan said, reading from the document. "To transition leadership to me over a 3-year period while remaining as senior advisor. She wanted you to have time to travel, to pursue hobbies, to—" He paused meaningfully. "To build a new life with someone who could make you happy." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Rachel had planned this too, had orchestrated not just Ari's romantic future, but his professional one as well. "I'm not ready to retire," Ari said, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. "You're 60 in a few months," I said quietly. "And your cardiologist said stress is your biggest risk factor. The business is stressful." "The business is my legacy." "The business is one legacy," Eitan corrected, "but it's not the only one. You have a son who loves you, a grandchild on the way." He glanced at Leora, who smiled and nodded. "And a woman who has rearranged her entire life to take care of you." My breath caught. "You're pregnant?" Leora's hand moved to her still flat stomach. 10 weeks. We wanted to wait until the first trimester was over to tell anyone. Ari moved around the table to embrace them both, his eyes shining with tears. A grandchild. Rachel would have been. She knew, Leora said softly. "I told her the week before she died that Eitan and I were going to start trying. She was so happy." The emotion in the room was palpable. I busied myself with serving dinner, giving them space for their joy, acutely aware that I was witnessing another milestone Rachel had planned for, but would never see. As we settled around the table, Eitan returned to the topic of succession. "I'm not saying you have to quit tomorrow, Dad. I'm saying we need a plan, a timeline, a way to ensure that you're still alive and healthy when this baby is born." Ari looked at the document Rachel had prepared, her handwriting visible in the margins where she had made notes. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "She thought of everything, didn't she?" "She loved you enough to plan for every contingency," I said, "including the one where you're too stubborn to take care of yourself." Despite the heaviness of the moment, Ari laughed. She did know me well. Over dinner, we discussed the succession plan in detail. Rachel had been thorough, outlining a gradual transition that would allow Ari to step back without feeling like he was abandoning his life's work. She had even included suggestions for how he might spend his retirement. Travel to places they had always talked about visiting, volunteering with organizations they had supported, teaching business courses at the local university. "She wanted you to have a second act," Eitan said. "Not just survive after she was gone, but thrive." "What about you?" Ari asked me. "What do you want?" The question caught me off guard. In the months since the wedding, I had been so focused on caring for Ari, on managing his health and supporting his grief, that I hadn't thought much about my own desires. "I want you healthy," I said carefully. "I want you happy. Beyond that." I shrugged. I'm still figuring it out. "You gave up your nursing career to take care of me," Ari said. "That wasn't fair to you." "I chose to be here," I corrected. "There's a difference." "But what if you could choose something else?" Leora asked. "Now that Ari is stable, now that you have support, what would you want to do?" The question resonated deeper than I wanted to admit. I had been a nurse for 10 years before becoming Rachel's private caregiver, had loved the work, the challenge, the feeling of making a tangible difference in people's lives. But I had also burned out on the long shifts, the emotional toll, the constant exposure to suffering. The role of private caregiver had been supposed to be temporary, a way to rebuild my strength while helping someone who needed me. Instead, it had become my entire life. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't let myself think that far ahead." "Maybe it's time to start," Eitan said gently. Mom's plan wasn't just about Dad's future. It was about giving all of us permission to move forward, including you. After Eitan and Leora left, Ari and I cleaned up the kitchen in comfortable silence. When the last dish was put away, he pulled me into his arms, holding me close. "Thank you," he murmured against my hair. "For what?" "For everything. For staying. For caring. For not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away." I pulled back to look at him. Where would I go? This is home now." "Is it?" His eyes searched mine. "Or are you just honoring a promise to a dead woman?" The question struck deeper than I expected. Was I here because I wanted to be, or because I had committed to Rachel and couldn't bring myself to break that commitment? "Both," I said honestly. "I'm here because I promised Rachel. But I stay because of you, because somewhere in the midst of caring for you, supporting you, arguing with you about your diet." I smiled. "I fell in love with you." It was the first time I had said the words aloud. They hung in the air between us, vulnerable and true. Ari's hands framed my face, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. "I love you too. Not because Rachel asked you to stay, not because you take such good care of me, but because you're you. Strong, stubborn, endlessly compassionate you." He kissed me then, and for the first time since the wedding, I allowed myself to believe that what we had was real. Not just a promise kept or a duty honored, but something chosen, something earned, something ours. 18 months after Eitan's wedding, I stood in the garden where Rachel had once grown her prize-winning roses. The October air carried the same crispness it had that day at the wedding, but everything else had changed. In my arms, a 3-month-old baby girl squirmed and cooed, her tiny fist wrapped around my finger with surprising strength. Aviva, the name Eitan and Leora had chosen, meaning spring in Hebrew. A symbol of new life, new beginnings. "She has Mom's eyes," Eitan said, settling onto the bench beside me. At 32, fatherhood had added a softness to his features that made him look more like Ari than ever. I looked down at the baby, seeing the truth in his words. Aviva's eyes were the same striking green that had characterized Rachel's gaze. Intelligent, warm, full of life. "She does," I agreed softly. "Rachel would have loved her so much." "She does love her," a voice said behind us. Ari approached, carrying a tray with coffee and the honey cakes that had become a weekend tradition. From wherever she is, she loves this little girl. He settled on my other side, his hand coming to rest on my knee in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The past year and a half had been transformative. True to the succession plan Rachel had created, Ari had gradually stepped back from daily business operations, transitioning leadership to Eitan while remaining a senior advisor and mentor. The change had been difficult at first. Ari had struggled with the loss of purpose, the sudden abundance of free time, the fear that without work to define him, he would disappear into grief again. But we had navigated it together. I had encouraged him to pursue the teaching position at the university that Rachel had suggested, had supported his decision to establish a nursing scholarship in Rachel's name, had traveled with him to the places Rachel had always wanted to visit, and slowly, carefully, we had built a life that honored Rachel's memory while creating space for our own story. "There's something I want to show you both," Eitan said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "I found it last week, tucked into one of Mom's gardening books." Ari took the envelope, his expression growing thoughtful as he recognized Rachel's handwriting. "Another letter? This one's addressed to Shira." My breath caught. In the nearly 2 years since Rachel's death, I had received several gifts she had left for me. Her favorite nursing books, a bracelet she had worn daily, photographs from her life that she had thought I might cherish. But a letter was different, more intimate, more final. "I don't know if I can read it," I admitted, my voice unsteady. "You don't have to read it now," Ari said gently. "But she wrote it for you. When you're ready, it will be here." I took the envelope, feeling the weight of Rachel's words through the paper. Later, I told myself, when I had the strength to face whatever she had wanted to say. Aviva fussed, and Eitan reached for her, cradling his daughter with the practiced ease of a devoted father. Watching him, I felt a pang of longing I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. I was 34 now, still young enough for children of my own. But the subject had never come up between Ari and me. He was 61, a grandfather, seemingly content with the family he had already built. "You're good with her," Leora said, appearing from the house with a bottle. "Natural." "I've had a lot of practice with babies," I said, deflecting the observation. "Nursing school required pediatric rotations." "It's more than training," Ari said quietly, his eyes on me. "You have a gift for caring." Rachel saw it immediately. The mention of Rachel felt different now than it had in those early, tense months after the wedding. We had learned to speak of her naturally, to incorporate her memory into daily life without making it a shrine. Eitan had been instrumental in that shift, sharing stories of his mother that painted her as a full person. Flawed, funny, fierce, and loving. "I should go," I said, standing and handing Aviva back to Leora. "I have some things to take care of before dinner." Ari gave me a searching look but didn't press. He had learned to recognize when I needed space. When the weight of being in Rachel's home, surrounded by Rachel's family, living Rachel's intended future for her husband became too much. I retreated to the small office I had claimed as my own, a room that had been Rachel's craft space, now transformed into a place where I could work on the nursing scholarship applications and coordinate the charitable foundation that had become my passion project. Rachel's letter sat on the desk, a silent presence demanding attention. I circled it for an hour, organizing papers, responding to emails, doing anything to avoid the inevitable. Finally, as the afternoon light began to slant through the windows, I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was dated 3 weeks before Rachel's death, written in the shaky handwriting that had characterized her final months. "My dearest Shira, if you're reading this, it means you kept your promise. You stayed. You cared for Ari when he couldn't care for himself. You weathered the judgment and whispers, and became part of a family that wasn't initially ready to accept you. I knew you would. From our first conversation, I recognized in you a strength that would not bend, a compassion that would not break, and a stubbornness that matched my own. I asked you to do an impossible thing, to love a man you met through his grief, to mother a son who wasn't yours, to fill a space in a family that would never stop missing me. And you did it. Not because it was easy, but because you saw what I saw. That Ari is worth saving, that Eitan is worth knowing, that this family is worth fighting for. But I didn't ask you to sacrifice yourself in the process. I didn't ask you to give up your own dreams, your own desires, your own future. So this letter is my permission, my command, really, to take what you need from this life we've built together. If that means continuing as you are, supporting Ari and loving this family, I bless it. If that means pursuing your own career, finding your own purpose beyond caring for broken hearts, I bless it. If that means having children of your own, if you want them, I bless it. And I hope Ari has the sense to give you that gift if you ask for it. You have given me peace in my final months. The peace of knowing that the people I love will be cared for, will be challenged, will be loved with the fierce devotion they deserve. Let me give you something in return. Permission to want more, to ask for more, to build a life that is yours, not just mine by proxy. You are not my replacement, Shira. You are your own woman, with your own strength, your own gifts, your own story to write. Don't let my death define you any more than it defines Ari or Eitan. Live fully. Love deeply. And know that whatever path you choose, you have my blessing and my gratitude. With all my love, Rachel, tears streamed down my face as I read the letter again and again. Rachel had seen me so clearly, had understood the trap I had fallen into of defining myself entirely through my relationship to her family. A soft knock at the door made me look up. Ari stood in the doorway, concern written across his features. "I saw you come in here," he said. "You've been crying." I handed him the letter wordlessly. He read it slowly, his expression shifting as he absorbed Rachel's words. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes that held both sorrow and something like understanding. "She's right," he said quietly. "I've been selfish. Accepting your care, your support, your love without thinking about what you might need from me in return. That's not true. You've given me so much." "I've given you a role in my life," he interrupted. "But Rachel is asking if you want more than a role, if you want a life of your own." I couldn't answer. The question was too big, too frightening. Ari crossed to me, kneeling beside my chair so we were eye level. "Tell me what you want, Shira. Not what Rachel wanted for you. Not what you think I need from you. What do you want?" The question cracked something open inside me. "I want to matter," I whispered. "Not just as your caretaker or Rachel's promise keeper. I want to matter as myself. You do matter. To me. To Aitan. To this family. But do I matter enough that you would give me what Rachel suggested? That you would consider having a child if that's what I wanted?" The question hung between us, vulnerable and terrifying. Ari's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, consideration, fear, and finally, something that looked like hope. "Is that what you want?" he asked carefully. "A child?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't let myself want it because I assumed it was impossible. You already have a son, a grandchild. You're 61 years old. Why would you want to start over? Why wouldn't I?" He took my hands in his. "Shira, I fell in love with you not because you were convenient or because Rachel asked me to. I fell in love with you because you're extraordinary, strong, compassionate, endlessly patient with a stubborn old man who doesn't deserve you. You're not old." "I'm 61, he repeated. "Old enough to be a grandfather, but not too old to be a father again. Not if that's what you want. Not if it means building a future with you that's ours, not just an extension of Rachel's plans." The possibility shimmered before me, terrifying and beautiful. A child of our own. A family we built together. "I need time to think," I said. "To figure out what I really want versus what I think I should want. Take all the time you need." He kissed my forehead gently. "But know this. Whatever you decide, whatever you ask of me, the answer will be yes. Because you matter, Shira. Not as Rachel's legacy, but as the woman I love, as the partner I choose every single day." 3 years later, I stood in the same garden, but the landscape had transformed. Rachel's roses still bloomed, but they now shared space with a sandbox and a small swing set. Aviva, now 3.5, pushed her baby brother on the swing, her laughter ringing through the autumn air. Aitan had 2 children now, Aviva and 2-year-old David, named for Ari's father, and I had one, 18-month-old Rachel, named for the woman who had brought us all together. The naming had been Ari's idea. "She gave us this," he had said when I first became pregnant. "She gave us permission to love each other, to build a family, to have a future. If we have a daughter, I want her to carry that legacy." Now, watching tiny Rachel toddle after her older cousins, her dark curls bouncing with each unsteady step, I felt the fullness of the life we had built. Not a replacement for what Rachel and Ari had shared, but something new. Something ours. "Shira," Aitan called from the patio. "Family photo time." I gathered up baby Rachel, who protested being removed from her play, and joined the others. Ari, silver-haired but healthy and vibrant at 64. Aitan and Leora, their marriage stronger than ever. The grandchildren, a beautiful chaos of energy and noise. And me, No longer the outsider, no longer the nurse or the promise keeper. Just Shira, wife, mother, daughter-in-law in spirit if not in law. Friend to a ghost who had orchestrated her own succession with grace. As the photographer arranged us, I felt Ari's arm around my waist, felt the weight of our daughter in my arms, felt the acceptance of a family that had needed time but had ultimately opened their hearts. "Smile," the photographer called. I didn't have to force it. The smile came naturally, born from gratitude and hard-won joy. Later, when the photos were developed, one would be placed on the mantel next to a picture of Rachel in her prime, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. Two women, two eras, one family bound together by love that extended beyond death. The silence that had greeted my arrival at that wedding had been deafening. But what followed, the revelation, the forgiveness, the slow building of trust and family, had been louder still. Rachel's final gift had been the freedom to love without guilt, and we had accepted it, all of us, building lives that honored her memory while refusing to be limited by it. In the end, that was the greatest legacy she could have left. Not a family frozen in grief, but one that chose to bloom again, season after season, generation after generation. 5 years after that October wedding, I knelt in Rachel's garden on a morning that felt suspended between seasons. The late September air carried the scent of the last summer roses, mingling with the first hints of autumn's approach. My hands worked the soil around a new planting, white peonies that wouldn't bloom until next spring, a patient investment in future beauty. "Careful with that one, Ima," a small voice said beside me. "Salve to Rachel's book says peonies need deep roots." I looked up at 7-year-old Aviva, Rachel's granddaughter, her green eyes, so like her grandmother's, serious with concentration as she consulted the worn gardening journal that had become her treasure. Aiton and Leora's eldest had inherited more than her grandmother's eyes. She had Rachel's fierce attention to detail, her determination to do things properly, her gentle command of any situation. "You're absolutely right," I said, sitting back on my heels. "What else does Salve to Rachel's book say?" Aviva flipped through pages marked with Rachel's handwriting, notes she had made in the final months before the garden became too much for her failing body. "It says peonies are for patience, that you plant them knowing you won't see results for years, that they teach us to think beyond ourselves." The wisdom in those words, written by a dying woman planning gardens she would never see bloom, made my throat tighten. 5 years gone, and Rachel's presence still permeated every corner of this space, this family, this life we had all built in her shadow and her light. Ima Shira, 3-year-old Rachel, our Rachel, Ari's and mine, came running across the lawn, her dark curls bouncing, clutching a handful of dandelions she had pulled from the edge of the rose beds. "Flowers for you." I accepted the weedy bouquet with appropriate reverence, pulling her onto my lap. She smelled of grass and sunshine and the apple juice she had spilled on her shirt at breakfast. Perfect and imperfect and entirely ours. "They're beautiful, Motek," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Should we put them in water?" "Abba says dandelions are weeds," she reported solemnly. "But I think they're pretty." "Your Abba is right that they're weeds," I agreed. "But you're also right that they're pretty. Sometimes things can be two things at once." From the patio, Ari's voice carried across the garden. "Philosophy lessons before 9 in the morning, Shira. The child is 3. I looked up to see my husband approaching, carrying a tray with coffee and the honey cakes that had become weekend tradition. At 64, Ari moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to listen to his body's limits. The heart scare 5 years ago had been followed by another, smaller incident 2 years later. Each one a reminder of mortality, each one met with adjustments and acceptance rather than the denial that had nearly killed him. "She's never too young to learn that contradictions exist," I called back, standing and lifting little Rachel onto my hip. Right, Aviva? Right. Aviva agreed, though her attention had already returned to the gardening journal. Ima Shira. It says here that Savta Rachel planted a memorial rose bush when her mother died. Do you think we should plant one for Savta Rachel? The question landed in the quiet morning with unexpected weight. We had created memorials, the nursing scholarship, the children's hospital wing, the foundation, but nothing here, in this garden that had been Rachel's sanctuary and joy. I think that's a beautiful idea, I said carefully. What do you think, Ari? He set down the tray and moved to stand beside us, looking at the garden his first wife had created with such care. In the 5 years since the wedding, Ari and I had learned to navigate these moments, when Rachel's memory rose up, not as a barrier between us, but as a shared heritage we both honored. I think, he said slowly, that Savta Rachel would love that. What kind of rose did she plant for her mother, Aviva? Aviva consulted the journal. A white climbing rose called New Dawn. She wrote that it blooms all season long, that it's hardy and forgiving, that it keeps giving beauty even when you think it's finished for the year. She looked up. That sounds like Savta Rachel, doesn't it? It does, Ari agreed, his voice rough with emotion. We'll order one this week. You can help choose where to plant it. Little Rachel squirmed in my arms, wanting down, and I released her to toddle after her older cousin. I watched them together, the granddaughter who remembered Rachel and the daughter who never would, and felt the strange ache of loving someone through her absence. You're quiet this morning, Ari observed, his hand finding the small of my back in the gesture that had become his signature touch. Protective, possessive, present. Just thinking about how much has changed, I admitted. 5 years ago, I thought I would always be the outsider, the woman who didn't belong in Rachel's garden. And now? I looked around at the space that had evolved under my uncertain care. Rachel's original plantings remained, the roses she had nurtured, the herb garden she had designed, the peonies she had planted with patience. But I had added too. A cutting garden for fresh flowers, a small vegetable patch where the children could dig, a meditation bench positioned to catch the morning light. Not Rachel's garden anymore, not mine either. Ours in the complicated way that everything in this family had become shared between past and present. Now I'm the woman who tends Rachel's garden while creating my own sections, I said. And somehow that feels right. Rachel would have liked that. Aiton's voice came from behind us. We turned to find him and Leora approaching, their younger son David riding on Aiton's shoulders. At 35, Aiton had grown into leadership of the family business with a confidence that honored his father's legacy while making the enterprise his own. Mom was always about evolution, not preservation. She would have hated the idea of this garden becoming a museum. Leora, now visibly pregnant with their third child, settled carefully onto one of the garden benches. She left instructions, in the journal, about what she wanted done with the garden after she was gone. We all turned to look at her. In the 5 years since the wedding, Leora had become more than my son's wife. She had become a bridge between Rachel's memory and the family's future. Someone who could speak of the mother-in-law she barely knew with both reverence and practicality. What did she say? I asked. Leora pulled out her phone, scrolling to a photo of a journal entry. Aviva and I found it last week when we were looking up the peony instructions. She wrote, "Gardens are meant to grow and change. The woman who tends this space after I'm gone should add her own vision to mine. That's not betrayal. That's collaboration across time." The words settled over me like a benediction. 5 years I had tended this garden with guilty hands, afraid that every change I made erased Rachel's presence. And all along, she had given permission for exactly that evolution. She really did think of everything, I said quietly. Not everything, Ari corrected, pulling me close. She couldn't have known exactly how beautiful our family would become, how well you would fit into spaces she had to leave empty, how much joy these children would bring. As if summoned by the mention of joy, chaos erupted. David scrambled down from his father's shoulders to chase after little Rachel and Aviva, who had discovered a butterfly in the rose bushes. Their shrieks of delight filled the garden with sound Rachel would have loved, children's laughter, the music of continuity. "Speaking of children," Leora said, her hand moving to her swollen belly, "this one is very active this morning. I think she knows we're in Savta Rachel's garden." "Another girl?" I moved to sit beside her. "You found out?" "Yesterday," Eitan confirmed, his face breaking into a smile that transformed him from serious businessman to delighted father. "We're thinking of naming her Sarah, after Leora's grandmother and—" He paused, looking at his father. "If it's okay with both of you, giving her the middle name Rachel." The request hung in the morning air. In the years since the wedding, we had navigated countless moments like this. Decisions about how to honor Rachel's memory, how to incorporate her into the family's ongoing story. Each one a negotiation between past and present, grief and joy. I looked at Ari, saw the sheen of tears in his eyes, and knew my own must mirror his. "I think," I said carefully, "that's a beautiful way to honor both grandmothers. Sarah Rachel. It has a lovely sound." "Rachel would have loved it," Ari added, "and she would have loved knowing that her name continues through the generations." What he didn't say, what we all understood, was that our daughter, little Rachel, carried that name too. Two Rachels in one family, one who had never met her namesake, one who wouldn't either. Both carrying forward a legacy of fierce love and practical wisdom. "There's something else," Eitan said, his expression growing serious. "Dad, Leora and I have been talking about the foundation, about Mom's legacy projects." The foundation had grown in the 5 years since Rachel's death. What had started as a nursing scholarship had expanded into a comprehensive charitable organization addressing healthcare access, education, and family support services. I had poured myself into the work, finding in it a purpose that went beyond caring for Ari and our daughter. "What about it?" Ari asked. "We want to make you president," Leora said, "officially. You've been doing the work anyway, Shira, making the decisions, setting the vision. It's time we acknowledge that this is your project now, grown from Rachel's seeds but cultivated by your hands." The offer stunned me. For 5 years, I had operated under the fiction that I was simply implementing Rachel's vision, carrying out her plans. The idea of claiming the foundation as my own felt presumptuous, disloyal. "I don't know," I said. "The foundation is Rachel's legacy. Making it mine feels like what Rachel intended," Eitan interrupted. "Mom didn't create the foundation to be a monument to herself. She created it to do good work. You've expanded it, improved it, made it more effective than she probably dreamed. Claiming that isn't betrayal. It's honoring her by making sure the work continues and grows." I looked at Ari, needing his blessing even as I knew I shouldn't need it. "Rachel gave you many gifts," he said quietly. "This family, this garden, the foundation. But the most important gift was permission to make them your own, to add your vision to hers, to build on what she started, rather than just preserving it in amber." "I'm scared," I admitted. Scared of making her disappear, of being the woman who erased Rachel Cohen from her own family's memory. "Look around," Leora said gently, gesturing to where the children played, to the garden that bloomed with both Rachel's original plantings and my additions, to the family gathered in the space Rachel had created. "Does this look like erasure, or does it look like evolution?" Aviva appeared at my elbow, the gardening journal still clutched in her hands. "Ima Shira, there's another note here, from Savta Rachel. Should I read it?" Please, I said, my voice unsteady. Aviva's clear voice read Rachel's words. To the woman who tends this garden after I'm gone, thank you. Thank you for not letting it die with me. Thank you for adding your own beauty to what I started. Thank you for teaching my grandchildren that growth and change aren't betrayal, but the highest form of honor. Make this space yours. Make this family yours. Make this life yours. I give you permission, and I give you my blessing. The tears came then, finally. 5 years of holding back against the fear that claiming this life meant betraying its architect. But Rachel had known, had planned for this too, had given permission not just for Ari to love again, but for me to fully inhabit the role she had left vacant. I'll do it, I said, looking at Eitan and Leora. I'll be president of the foundation. I'll make it mine while honoring what Rachel started. Good, Eitan said simply, because I already had the paperwork drawn up. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, grinning at my expression. What? I'm my father's son. We plan ahead. The laughter that followed felt cleansing, a release of tension I hadn't known I was carrying. Ari pulled me close, and we watched the children play in the garden while discussing foundation plans and baby names, and the memorial rows we would plant. Ordinary conversations. Family conversations. The kind Rachel had dreamed of when she orchestrated this impossible situation 5 years ago. As the morning warmed and we eventually moved inside for breakfast, I paused at the garden gate, looking back at the space that had taught me so much about growth and change, and the strange mathematics of love that doesn't divide, but multiplies. Rachel's roses climbed their trellises alongside the vegetables I had planted. Her herb garden thrived next to the meditation bench I had added. Her grandchildren played in the sandbox I had installed, learning from her journal how to tend the plants she had loved. Nothing was lost. Everything had changed. Both truths existed simultaneously, without contradiction. That evening, after the family had gone home and little Rachel was asleep in her bed, I found Ari in his study, looking at the photograph of Rachel that he kept on his desk. Not hidden away, but present. A reminder of what had been, what had made him who he was. Do you ever regret it? I asked from the doorway, choosing to move forward with me instead of staying locked in grief. He looked up, his expression tender. Every day I'm grateful Rachel gave me permission to love you. And every day I'm grateful you were brave enough to accept that gift. I moved to sit beside him, looking at the photograph. Rachel smiled from the frame, vibrant and alive, frozen in a moment before cancer stole her vitality. I used to be afraid she would haunt me, I admitted, that her ghost would always stand between us. And now? Now I think she stands beside us. Not between. Her blessing carries us forward, but she's not a barrier. She's a foundation we build on. Ari pulled me close, and we sat together in the quiet study, honoring the woman who had loved us both enough to plan for this moment. This peace, this acceptance, this family that had grown from her generosity and foresight. Later, as I prepared for bed, I found myself standing in the doorway of little Rachel's room. She slept sprawled across her bed, arms thrown wide, dark curls tangled on her pillow. So unlike the Rachel she was named for, yet carrying that legacy forward in her own unique way. I promise, I whispered to the sleeping child, to teach you about the woman whose name you carry. Not as a saint or a martyr, but as a real person who loved fiercely and planned carefully and gave gifts that lasted beyond her life. She would have liked that, Ari said softly behind me. Rachel always hated being put on a pedestal. She would want our daughter to know her as human, flawed and fierce and full of love. We stood together in the doorway, watching our daughter sleep, and I thought about the gift Rachel had given us. Not just permission to be together, but the framework for how to honor the past while embracing the future. In the garden below, visible through the window, moonlight touched the roses Rachel had planted years ago. By spring, the new peonies would push through the soil, taking their time to establish the deep roots necessary for decades of blooming. And somewhere among the established plants, we would add a memorial rose, New Dawn, hardy and forgiving, blooming all season long. A garden of second chances, tended by hands that honored what came before while creating what would come next. That was Rachel's final gift. Not just the family she had built, but the permission for it to evolve beyond her direct influence. The trust that we would tend her legacies, her son, her grandchildren, her husband, her garden, her charitable work, with care and love and the willingness to add our own visions to hers. 5 years after that October wedding, I had finally learned what Rachel had tried to teach me from the beginning, that claiming this life wasn't betrayal. It was the highest form of honor. Making something beautiful from the foundation she had laid, adding my own beauty to hers, creating something that neither of us could have built alone. In the garden of second chances, everything grew together, past and present, grief and joy, memory and hope. And in that growth, in that impossible intertwining of what was and what could be, Rachel's blessing bloomed eternal. The silence that had greeted my arrival at that wedding was long past. In its place was the sound of children's laughter, family dinners, foundation meetings, and quiet moments in a garden where two women's visions grew side by side, creating beauty that honored both the woman who planted the seeds and the woman who tended them into new life. That was the legacy. Not one woman replacing another, but two women, across the boundary of death, collaborating to create something neither could have achieved alone. A family, a garden, a future built on the past but not limited by it. And somewhere, I like to imagine, Rachel smiled.